A simple woman was humiliated and ridiculed during her very first jiu-jitsu class, and yet, by the end of that same class, she walked out wearing a black belt. What happened in that short time left the entire gym speechless. But before that moment of glory, came something much darker. She walked into that dojo not to prove anything to anyone but herself. She didn't have the perfect body, she didn't have the confidence, and she sure as hell didn't have the approval of anyone in that room. What she had was a quiet need to do something just for her. But the second she stepped onto that mat, every eye turned sharp. Judging. Measuring. Dismissing. The instructor didn't even wait 5 minutes before turning her into a joke. In front of everyone, he smiled and said, "A housewife who wants to play warrior. Please, don't break a nail while you're at it." The class erupted in laughter. That was the moment. The moment she shrank inside, but didn't leave. The moment she realized they weren't going to take her seriously no matter what she did. She became their entertainment, their warm-up dummy, their easy target. No one wanted to partner with her. No one wanted her there. Every takedown was harder than it had to be. Every mistake was met with mockery, not correction. And through it all, she stayed silent, swallowing every ounce of humiliation, her face burning in shame, her eyes fixed on the mat as if it were the only place left in the world that didn't laugh at her. But something shifted. When she was finally given a chance to roll, truly roll, with a partner who didn't hold back, the laughter stopped. She moved with instinct. With speed. With control no one could explain. The girl who everyone mocked suddenly flipped her opponent like she had done it 100 times before. There were no cheers. No applause. Just silence. Silent confusion. Silent fear. Silent awe. It was as if the room couldn't make sense of what it was seeing. Like they had just awakened something they didn't understand. And sitting in the back of that room, almost hidden, was someone nobody noticed. A man who said nothing the entire class. A man who would change everything with one decision. He had come that day to observe. To scout. To find someone rare. And when he saw her move, he saw something he hadn't seen in over a decade, raw, untapped potential. But who was she, really? And how could a woman with no training dominate a room full of trained athletes on her first day? What secret was she hiding? And more importantly, why did she come to that class in the first place? Stay until the end. You're not ready for what's coming. You're about to dive into a powerful and emotional story of humiliation, resilience, and an unexpected twist that will leave you breathless. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Hope Threads, for more stories that inspire and surprise. Let's begin. Enjoy the story. Emily Parker had always been the kind of woman who made herself small to fit into the spaces where she wasn't invited. Growing up in a quiet suburb outside of Des Moines, Iowa, she was the girl who never asked for seconds, never raised her hand in class, and never pushed back when her brothers teased her just a little too hard. Her life had been one long lesson in staying quiet, staying polite, staying agreeable. She married young, to a man who spoke for both of them most of the time, and became a mother before she had figured out who she was. At 37, with 2 teenage sons and a husband whose love had long faded into habit, Emily lived a life that looked perfect from the outside and felt invisible from the inside. Her days were filled with errands, meal preps, laundry cycles, and scheduled silences. She didn't complain. She didn't resist. She just existed, until something inside her began to push against the walls she had built around herself. It started slowly, like a thought she couldn't shake. A whisper inside that said, "What if there's more?" She didn't know what more looked like, but she knew it didn't feel like waiting for dinner to finish in the oven while folding socks. So one day, with no one watching and nothing to lose, she opened her laptop and typed in a search, "Adult martial arts classes near me." She wasn't looking to become a fighter. She wasn't even sure she'd go. But the idea, the possibility, gave her something she hadn't felt in years, curiosity. She chose a small jiu-jitsu academy across town. The website was basic, the photos grainy, but it offered beginner-friendly classes, and the schedule fit right between school drop-offs and grocery runs. It felt unthreatening, manageable. She didn't tell anyone. Not her husband. Not her friends. Not even her kids. It was hers. Just hers. The first time she walked through the doors of Victory Ground Jiu-Jitsu, she was wearing leggings, an oversized hoodie, and anxiety-like armor. The academy had a faint smell of sweat and rubber mats, not unpleasant but unmistakable. Posters of competitions and black and white photos of stern-faced masters lined the walls. The reception desk was empty, but the mat space beyond it was alive with bodies twisting, grappling, breathing hard, grunting. It felt like stepping into a world she had never been invited to. And in many ways, she hadn't. At the front of the class stood Coach Ryan Maddox, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 40s, with a buzz cut that looked intentional and a voice that didn't need a mic. His posture said discipline, and his tone said authority. He spotted her almost immediately, a deer in suburban headlights, clutching her borrowed GI in a plastic grocery bag. He raised an eyebrow, didn't smile, and without moving an inch, called out across the mat, "Can I help you?" She fumbled. Her voice barely carried. I signed up online. For the beginner class. He stared at her a second longer than necessary, then nodded toward a small changing room to the side. "Get dressed. We're starting." The other students, mostly men in their 20s and 30s, a few athletic women with intense eyes, didn't greet her. They glanced, smirked, and returned to their stretches. Only one woman, tall and lean with a purple belt and an aggressive ponytail, made direct eye contact and didn't bother to hide her amusement. That was Cassidy, Ryan's star student, competition champ, and unofficial queen of the academy. Cassidy had trained there for 6 years and treated newcomers the way apex predators treat prey. She saw Emily, sized her up in half a glance, and grinned like she'd just been handed dessert. Emily's hands shook as she struggled to tie her belt in the corner of the mat. The knot didn't hold, the fabric was stiff, and her nerves made everything harder. No one offered to help. She wasn't sure if they didn't notice or just didn't care. When the warm-up began, she copied the others, jogging in circles, doing shrimp escapes, forward rolls. She felt awkward and clumsy, like every movement betrayed her presence there. Her chest burned from the effort, her face flushed with embarrassment. She couldn't tell if it was the sweat or the shame. It was during a drill demonstration that the moment came, the moment she'd replay over and over in her head. Coach Ryan had just shown a takedown variation, and while pairing up the class, he paused in front of her and chuckled low, barely shaking his head. "A housewife who wants to play warrior," he said just loud enough for the entire room to hear. Then, louder, "Please, don't break a nail while you're at it." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it cut deep. It was the kind of laughter that didn't need volume to wound. It carried judgment. It carried certainty. It said, "You don't belong here." No one defended her. Not even a whisper of discomfort. Cassidy actually nodded in agreement, grabbing a partner and leaving Emily to stand alone. Her heart thudded in her chest, hot with humiliation. But she didn't walk out. Something in her locked down, not in panic, but in refusal. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Coach Ryan finally gestured to another student, a quiet brown belt named Marco, and told him to go easy on her. It wasn't kindness. It was pity dressed as protocol. Marco nodded, polite and quiet, but detached. Emily partnered with him, mimicking the movements, trying not to look as lost as she felt. Every grip she fumbled was another whisper of doubt. Every slip, another internal scream. But she stayed. She kept trying. She kept listening. As the class progressed, something began to settle inside her. Not comfort. Not confidence. But control, a kind of quiet awareness of her own body. Her hands started to move more naturally. Her instincts sharpened. She didn't realize it at first, but Marco did. He slowed down. Watched her more closely. Began to test her responses, just a little. Nothing flashy, but noticeable. She began to match his movements with an ease that surprised them both. Cassidy, watching from the side, narrowed her eyes. Coach Ryan didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. By the end of the class, when everyone was sweating and breathing heavy, Coach Ryan decided to end with light sparring, rolling. Beginners usually didn't participate, but today he made an exception. "Let's see what our warrior mom can do," he smirked, pointing at Emily. Then, with a grin toward Cassidy, "Cass, give her a round." Cassidy didn't hesitate. She loved this. She walked to the center like a lioness being served dinner. Emily's limbs felt heavy. Her mouth was dry. She didn't want this. But she also didn't want to step back. Not now. They bumped fists. And just like that, the room changed. It wasn't a fight. Not really. But it was fast. Furious. Cassidy moved with purpose, speed, aggression. Emily moved with something else, something that didn't come from training, but from somewhere deeper. Reflex. Flow. Control. And when Cassidy tried to throw her, it didn't work. When she tried to pass her guard, she slipped. And in a single, fluid movement, Emily took her back, and applied pressure. Real pressure. Not wild, not lucky. Technical. Clean. Cassidy tapped. The silence that followed was louder than the laughter from earlier. Coach Ryan's face went still. Marco looked stunned. Emily stood up, blinking, breathing, her heart pounding not from fear, but from something else entirely. Something had changed. But no one knew how much, not yet. Not even Emily. Because somewhere in that room, someone had been watching from the back. A man who had seen thousands of students roll. A man who had once trained champions. And what he saw that day in Emily Parker would change everything. The days that followed Emily's first class were quiet on the surface, but something inside her had cracked wide open. She returned to the academy every single day that week. She didn't ask questions. She didn't make conversation. She showed up early, tied her belt tighter, moved like she was supposed to be there. Ryan stopped mocking her. Cassidy stopped making eye contact. But the tension simmered under the surface like a pot just shy of boiling. Emily trained with Marco again and again. He didn't say much, but he watched her, truly watched her, with the kind of careful attention that made her wonder if he saw something in her she couldn't see herself. She felt the shifts in her body, in her reactions, in her posture. There was a rhythm to it now, like muscle memory awakened from somewhere forgotten. But she couldn't explain how she knew what to do. She just did. One morning, just before class, Ryan received a call. His expression changed as he listened, nodded a few times, then ended the call with a clipped, "All right." He turned to the group, clapped his hands once, and said they'd have a special visitor that afternoon, someone who might be scouting for new talent. Most of the class buzzed with curiosity, but Emily just felt her stomach tighten. Something in her chest twisted with a strange mix of dread and certainty. The visitor arrived after noon class, wearing a gray hoodie, jeans, and an expression like he'd seen too much and said too little for too long. His name was Daniel Rhodes. No belt. No introduction. Just a quiet presence that seemed to draw attention without effort. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching everything like he was reading a book the rest of them couldn't see. When class ended, he didn't speak to anyone. But as Emily was rolling up her GI in the corner, she heard his voice behind her, calm and direct. "You trained before," he said, not asking, just stating. Emily turned, startled. "I know." I mean, not really. I've watched videos, that's all. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Videos don't give you reflexes like that. Or the kind of pressure you applied on Cassidy. Emily hesitated. She didn't have an answer. She barely understood herself. He stepped closer, lowered his voice. You're holding back. Why? She blinked. Her hands tightened on the GI. Because if I show more, I don't know what happens after that. He didn't smile, but something in his eyes softened. Then let's find out. The next week, Daniel returned, not to visit, but to coach. Not officially. Not announced. But his presence began shifting things inside the academy. Ryan wasn't pleased. It was obvious. He avoided Daniel. Spoke louder when he was near. Directed the class away from his gaze. Cassidy followed Ryan's lead, more aggressive in her roles, more dismissive in her glares. But Daniel focused on Emily. Quiet drills. Small corrections. Whispered questions that made her think deeper. The rest of the class noticed, but no one dared say it out loud. Until one afternoon, Cassidy snapped. They were drilling back takes, and Daniel had just given Emily a nod after a clean transition. Cassidy, nearby, scoffed loud enough to be heard. Oh please, she muttered, can we stop pretending she's some kind of prodigy? She's a bored housewife who got lucky once. She doesn't even know what she's doing. Daniel looked up, but said nothing. Emily stayed silent. Cassidy stepped forward. You think just because she caught me off guard one time, she belongs here? She's not even competition material. Ryan walked over, arms crossed. She's right, he said. Let's stop wasting time. Some people were made for this. Others aren't. Emily stood still. Her hands didn't move. Her breath shallow. Something inside her curled into a knot so tight, it nearly broke her in half. But Daniel's voice cut through. She's more ready than you'll ever be, he said, eyes on Cassidy. And the only reason you don't see it is because you're too busy protecting your ego. Cassidy turned, flushed. Excuse me. Daniel didn't flinch. You've plateaued. You're strong, sure. Fast. But she's smart. She adapts. And that's what makes a real fighter. Ryan stepped in. You're out of line, Rhodes. Daniel met his gaze. You called me here to scout talent. I'm telling you what I see. Silence. Tense. Thick. Emily's heart thundered in her chest, but she didn't speak. Not yet. Then Cassidy's voice sliced through. Then put her in the tournament. Daniel paused. What tournament? Ryan answered. Regional qualifiers. This weekend. Our top competitors are registered. Cassidy crossed her arms. Let's see what she really has. One match. With me. Daniel looked at Emily. You want this? Her throat was dry. Her hands trembled. But the voice that came out wasn't weak. Yes. The room buzzed. Whispers. Disbelief. Ryan rolled his eyes and walked off. Cassidy just smirked. The day of the tournament, the gym was electric. The mats gleamed under the overhead lights. Competitors in branded GIs stretched, warmed up, cracked knuckles. Emily sat alone on a bench, wrapped in silence. She wore a plain GI, no team patch, no visible rank. An outsider in every way. But Daniel sat beside her, calm. Don't fight her, he said. Read her. Let her make the first mistake. She nodded. When her name was called, the murmurs rose. Some laughed. Some looked confused. Cassidy entered the mat with confidence so sharp it cut the air. The ref called them forward. They bumped fists. And then it began. The match was fast. Cassidy attacked early, aggressive and loud. Emily absorbed. Redirected. Waited. The crowd leaned in. Daniel didn't blink. Then, in a flash, Cassidy overcommit. Emily slipped under. Took the back. Secured the choke. Tightened. Cassidy tapped. The buzzer rang. Silence. Then, a single clap. Daniel. Then another. And another. Until the whole gym echoed with applause. Emily stood, breathless, tears stinging the back of her eyes. She had done it. But it wasn't over. Daniel stepped onto the mat, pulled a badge from his jacket, and handed her a card. "I'm starting a private training team. Invitation only. You're in." Ryan stormed over. "You can't take her. She's mine." Daniel stared at him. "You never saw her." Ryan clenched his jaw, turned, and walked away. Cassidy, still on the mat, wouldn't meet her eyes. Emily looked down at the card in her hand. It wasn't just a team. It was a new beginning. And as the crowd buzzed and the lights began to dim, Emily realized something deeper than victory, that this moment wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about finally believing she had never been wrong for wanting more. In the weeks following the tournament, everything shifted. Victory Ground Jiu-Jitsu no longer looked the same, felt the same, or breathed the same. Emily's name became a quiet echo in every corner of the gym, not shouted or celebrated, but spoken with the tense respect that people reserve for things they don't fully understand. Ryan stopped speaking to her altogether. When she walked in, he turned away. He refused to call her out during class, pretended she wasn't even on the mat. And yet, the power had already slipped from his hands. The students saw what had happened. They had witnessed the match, the tap, the offer. They knew. Cassidy avoided her. She trained harder, stayed longer, but something had cracked inside her confidence. She no longer walked like the queen of the gym. She had tasted the edge of her own limits and didn't know what to do with that flavor. And though she wouldn't say it out loud, her silence around Emily said everything. That ego, once untouchable, had been fractured in full view of everyone. Daniel didn't make promises. He didn't sell dreams. What he offered was structure, demand, and direction. Emily joined his private training team 2 weeks after the tournament. No social media post. No farewell to the gym. She simply stopped showing up to Victory Ground and started showing up at a private facility across town, an old warehouse converted into a minimalist training space with clean mats, cold air, and quiet intensity. There were only 4 others on the team. Each of them hand-picked. Each of them dangerous in their own way. Emily was the only woman, the only one without a formal background, and the one everyone underestimated, at first. But inside that space, stripped of hierarchy and history, she thrived. Daniel pushed her beyond what she thought possible. Drills until her fingers bled, positional sparring until her lungs gave out, mental coaching that cracked open parts of her she didn't even know were locked. And she never once complained. Not once. Because for the first time in her life, she felt alive. Outside the mats, her home life began to change. Her husband, Michael, noticed first. The meals weren't always hot anymore. The laundry sometimes piled up. But more than that, her gaze shifted. She listened less. Agreed less. She stood straighter. She answered questions with silence when words weren't owed. He didn't know how to handle that. One evening, after a particularly long day of training, she came home and found him in the kitchen, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He asked where she had been. She said training. He said it was getting out of hand. She looked at him and said, for the first time in her life, it's just beginning. The silence that followed that sentence was thicker than years of unspoken resentment. He didn't argue. He didn't understand. And that was okay. She wasn't doing this for him. Months passed. Her body changed. Her presence sharpened. She entered her first official tournament under Daniel's team, wearing a new GI, bearing no team patches, just her name embroidered in small letters across the chest. She fought like someone who had nothing to prove and everything to express. Each match was clinical, graceful, precise. No rage. No need for revenge. Just execution. By the end of the day, she stood on the podium with a gold medal hanging from her neck. The crowd cheered. Photos were taken. But the most satisfying sound was the voice of her son, who had snuck into the venue with a friend and now stood beside the mat, looking up at her with awe and a single word in his voice, "Mom." She looked down, tears springing to her eyes, and for the first time in her life, she felt seen by her own blood, not as a mother, not as a wife, but as herself. Ryan's gym struggled. Word got around. The match with Cassidy was posted online, and the comments were brutal. Students left. His reputation, once sharp-edged and undeniable, began to dull. He doubled down on control, ran stricter classes, pushed the narrative that Emily had been a fluke. But everyone had seen it. Everyone had heard the silence when Cassidy tapped. He lost credibility, one student at a time. Cassidy eventually left the gym too. Not in shame, but in need. She joined a women's-only academy across town and started from scratch, relearning with humility. It was hard. But over time, she found herself again, not through dominance, but through reflection. In her new space, she coached beginners. And when she saw a hesitant woman walk in one day, looking lost and out of place, Cassidy walked up to her and tied her belt for her. No words. Just a nod. And that was growth. Emily's journey didn't end on that podium. She began teaching on weekends, private sessions for women who had been told they were too late, too old, too soft. Her story traveled in whispers. Her students were survivors, caretakers, former athletes, and quiet warriors. They came to her not for technique, but for permission, to be strong, to take up space, to feel anger, to transform it. And she gave them that without asking for anything in return. Her classes weren't about belts or medals. They were about reclamation. Daniel watched her become something neither of them expected. He had seen potential, yes. But what he hadn't seen, what no one had, was the depth of her transformation. She wasn't just an athlete. She was a symbol. Not of revenge. But of awakening. Of choosing yourself in a world that teaches you to be everyone else. Years later, when Emily stood in front of a room full of women during a self-defense seminar, she began her speech not with technique or tactics, but with truth. She said, "There was a time I thought silence was strength. That shrinking was surviving. I don't believe that anymore. Now I know, strength sounds like breath under pressure. Like saying no without apology. Like choosing yourself when no one else will." The room fell silent. And in that silence, stories were rewritten. So if you've ever felt dismissed, if you've ever been told you don't belong, if you've been laughed at for trying, this story is for you. Not just to inspire, but to remind you that the version of yourself they laugh at today might be the version they fear tomorrow. Now let me ask you, what part of yourself have you been silencing, waiting for someone to give you permission to become? Comment below and tell us what this story meant to you. What part of it made you feel seen? And if you want more stories like this, stories of transformation, of justice, of unexpected power, make sure to subscribe to Hope Threads and hit that like button. There's more coming. And maybe, the next story will be yours.